children, so I raised them. Years later, they offer me money as a thank you, but she demands it. Hello, I am 48F, and my younger sister, Diana, is 46F. Diana and I never got along well as youngsters. She was always snobbish and unpleasant to me, so we split up as soon as we graduated high school. I elected to continue my education, whilst she preferred to live with her boyfriend at the moment. It was lucky that her lover was wealthy, as our parents could never have afforded the rent for her to live alone. However, she made it abundantly obvious to our parents that she was unconcerned about their opinions on her life and would do whatever she wanted. So my parents never tried to stop her and instead let her go free. Diana had twin girls at 20 and a boy at 21 while living with her lover. My parents were pleased for her, but also anxious because she now had many responsibilities and no work. She was wholly dependent on her boyfriend's money to support her lifestyle. Diana never married her partner, which I believe was a mistake because she would have been entitled to alimony if they split up. They had to part ways after Diana discovered that he had been cheating on her. Thankfully, he provided the child support she was entitled to, but he chose not to be a father and signed away his parental rights. The girls were 3 years old at the time, but my nephew was only 2. After that, my sister was fully on her own and required all of the assistance she could get to maintain herself. Despite our sour relationship, I chose to assist her, primarily owing to pressure from our parents. At the time, I made a respectable living, but it wasn't enough to sustain all 4 of them. However, my parents and I gave a tiny bit of money each month, and they were able to make ends meet. She struggled for the first several months because she lacked a degree and work experience. She had to start at the bottom and work her way up, which forced her to dedicate a significant amount of time to her employment in order to grow rapidly. But this was difficult because she also had to consider her children, and she couldn't simply leave them at home. Hiring a babysitter was a possibility, but it was prohibitively expensive, so she was forced to rely on me or her friends. Our parents were also working and contributing financially to aid her, so they were unable to stay at home with the children. I was in the same predicament. She didn't have any friends who would take on the duty of minding her children while she worked because they all had their own lives and occupations. As a result, she was limited to minimum wage positions that allowed her to work flexible hours and return home quickly. This allowed her to avoid paying the babysitter to stay with her children for an extended period of time, which would have been prohibitively expensive. This condition persisted for a few years, and I believe Diana began to despise her own children because she saw them as hurdles to her success. She said that they were the only things preventing her from moving forward. I would pay her a visit on occasion, not for her sake, but for the sake of the children, to make sure they were doing well. I didn't have a nice connection with her, but I wasn't ruthless enough to let innocent children suffer because of their mother's poor decisions. So my parents and I would check on the kids on a regular basis. They were always complaining about Diana's mistreatment of them. She would chastise them for minor infractions and strike out at them simply for being children and trying to have fun. It was a dreadful existence for all of them, and I hoped I could help them by removing them from that place and keeping them with me, but I couldn't because she was the rightful parent and I had no legal authority over them. Furthermore, she received child support from her ex and was doing her best to make ends meet. I felt awful for her, but even worse for the kids. Diana started seeing other men, which made things considerably worse. Every time a relationship failed, she blamed her children. She was convinced that once her partners discovered she was a mother of 3, they would abandon their relationship with her. I believe it was because she never mentioned her children during the early stages of dating, only bringing it up after a month or 2, which appeared dishonest. I tried several times to explain this to her, but she was convinced that she was being rejected because she had children. She kept teasing them about it, reminding them of how their father had abandoned her and threatening to leave them as well if they didn't behave. The children were scared of her, and their childhood was defined by their mother's narcissism. This continued for years. Several times, I considered taking the kids and fleeing with them, but I couldn't. I could not petition for custody or denounce her because, while her actions were wrong, they did not justify taking the children away from her. So the scenario remained, and the kids were simply grateful to have me in their life. My parents were too elderly to be their pals, but I was always there for them when they needed it. They could never tell their mother about their issues, but they could always go to their aunt, which they did. Whenever they had problems with school, academics, or even Diana, they would come to me, and I appreciated their trust. It's no surprise that when they turned 18, they decided to leave their mother's house and move in with me instead. Now that they were no longer children, they could select where and with whom to live, and they chose me. Diana was clearly dissatisfied and had a lot to say. She stated she had squandered 18 years of her life raising these children, only for them to abandon her in the end. She was really unpleasant about it, telling me that if I had wanted to raise her children so badly, I should have stepped in sooner rather than taking over after the work was basically done.